Been signing in over there. Any of you who've not signed in at a previous program, we'd love it if you'd leave your name and email. And actually, Rick's got another thing he wants people to sign in for, and he'll tell you about that. When I interviewed Rick Wise about today's program some time ago, we got off on a kind of a side discussion, and that was my fault, not his. We got to talking about the comic actor Leslie Nielsen, star of Airplane, and what was it? The not lethal weapon, the one that was the Naked Gun. Naked Gun, yeah. And we did that because back in the 50s, before the world discovered how funny he was, he played Francis Marion on TV, and both of us enjoyed that. The difference between us is that Rick spent the next 60 years or so getting smarter and learning more about Francis Marion, and I did not. I don't know much more than the TV show did. So I hope to learn more today. Rick is the interim director of the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust, and for a number of years now, he has been working hard with other people on a project to edit and then publish Francis Marion's papers for publication. He's here to tell us about it, and I hope y'all will join me in welcoming Rick Wise.
Okay, folks, I'm going to stand up here somewhat informally, and I'm not going to use the microphone or any of that happy stuff because I spent 23 years in the Army, and if you can't hear me, I'm not trying hard. Okay, so you are here because you're interested in Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox. And I will tell you that many of you have read the different authors, biographers, historians about Marion. You've read Robert Bass, Rankin. Even Parson Weems covers a whole bunch of that, even though Parson Weems is the same guy that brought you the George Washington and the cherry tree, which is not true. So that one you have to be very careful with. But the thing is, none of these folks had access to the papers of Francis Marion. After 240 some years, we know a little bit different story than what everybody has been told. Has it changed history? Because I'm here to tell you, when I got my master's degree in military history, and Charles Baxley, who was remember Charles, he passed away here a couple of weeks ago. Charles was the kind of guy that brought everybody together. And when I first met Charles Baxley at the Francis Marion Symposium, he said, "What are you doing your master's thesis on?" And I was like, "What my unit did in Desert Storm and the training and stuff we did to prepare us for how well we executed." And he goes, "Have you thought about doing Francis Marion's Bridges campaign? Nobody has done it." I did my master's thesis on Francis Marion's Bridges campaign. And I will tell you, I was thinking personally, there have been over 240 years of water under that bridge. You won't find anything new. Guess what? We found something new. And I'm going to share a little bit about that through the process we went through today. Okay, as Brad alluded to, everything has a beginning. For those of you who may be a tad younger than folks like me, that's Walt Disney there on your left. And there's a picture of Francis Marion behind him. Walt Disney was trying to capitalize a little bit on his the good success they had with the Davy Crockett series. So in 1959 to 1961, there were 8 episodes of Francis Marion. And as Brad said, Leslie Nielsen was the guy. Okay, Folks, I'm here to tell you, if Leslie Nielsen was playing Thomas Sumter, no one would blink an eye. Thomas Sumter was like the high school quarterback. Athletic, tall, very charismatic. Hey, good fit. Leslie Nielsen was only about 10 inches taller and 50 pounds heavier than Francis Marion. And whereas old Leslie here and Thomas Sumter may have been the high school quarterback, at least Light Horse Harry Lee said that Marion's visage was not pleasing. Now, I'm here to tell you, we don't really know what Marion looked like, but one of the things we do know is that Disney inspired a lot of people to check out the Swamp Fox and what the Swamp Fox was all about. So, I remember seeing this as a little boy. Do you?
Yes.
Okay.
On DVD.
Okay, if y'all want to start singing Swamp Fox, tail on his hat, nobody knows where the Swamp Fox is at. Well, we won't go any farther. Okay, meet Dave Nealon. Dave Nealon lived up in Pennsylvania, but he had family near Florence, South Carolina. And when he would come down to Florence, one of the things that he would do is all his relatives down here would tell him stories, things like about the Swamp Fox. Well, I'm here to tell you, he already had been watching that on Disney, and he was inspired. So he goes to a bookstore in Georgetown, South Carolina, and they got three choices of books. You've got Bass that we talked about, we got Rankin that we talked about, and Weems. For whatever reason, he chose Weems, and he got a very romanticized story of Marion. Now, I'm here to tell you, as a historian, you can read Weems because Weems was based on Peter Ory's memoirs. And if you read it carefully, there will be times when you get just the facts, that it's not embellished much and that sort of thing. I've learned to determine that that was Peter Ory's writing. And then you'll get something that, where Marion says something like, Lady Liberty is my mistress. No, Marion didn't do that. Marion was not that kind of guy. He was not verbose. He was not over the top. So you can figure out stuff. But Dave used that, and he started doing this study. And he was finding out about Francis Marion. And then around 2005, as he was doing more study, and he found that he could not find original sources too much. And so his thought was, where are all these letters and other documents about Francis Marion? And so he started looking, and he would find a few here, find there, a few there. And then as he was doing that, he made a transition. He became Columbo. Now, I'm here to tell you, in talking to Dave, this was definitely something that was heartfelt on his part, because he went all over the world practically looking for Francis Marion stuff. We're talking about going to the archives at, going to Harvard, going to Michigan, going to all the different places in the northern state. Okay, here's a question for you. How did all of Marion's letters get in the archives like in Michigan and New York and
Union
other
soldiers
states?
took them when they were Union soldiers took them when they were marching through South Carolina.
That is correct. A lot of the stuff that was picked up went there. Supposedly, there was an original manuscript that Peter Ory had, and we think it was probably burned in Columbia along with a bunch of other stuff. At least that's our guess. But anyways, as he's going through there are people that are autograph collectors. And those autograph collectors, they're getting all these documents that's got Francis Marion's name on it. And their interest is, they've got a document with Francis Marion's name on it. Guys like me, we want to know what he said. Where was he? How did he describe certain actions? We'll get into a little bit into that. He went to auction houses that were selling these things. And as he would go to the auction houses that were selling the different Marion papers or whatever, sometimes they would have it listed right on the in their catalog or whatever, and have the full document there so people could see what it was. Hey, what do? Hey, you make a photocopy of that, and then you transcribe it. A lot of what Dave did here was transcribing hieroglyphics. Because if you see some of these documents, some people write better than others, but still, remember, Webster's dictionary did not exist back then. And how people spelled things, sometimes how they structured their sentences, all that, it does not convey readily into the 21st century sometimes. And so Dave spent years putting these things together and transcribing them. He also shared this information in his quest with others. He received a lot of support from Charles Baxley and others. Charles had an organization called Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution. You can go to the SCAR website, that's what we call it, SCAR, and find all sorts of articles there on the SCAR website that talks about the American Revolution, particularly in South Carolina, the Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution. Oh, by the way, you may realize that not a lot of people from not here realize that the Southern Campaigns of the American Revolution actually has been interpreted to mean that South Carolina had more battles and engagements than anybody else in the American Revolution. If you don't believe it, just ask Siri, she'll tell you. Okay? Used to be New Jersey, but we think we've usurped them at this point. Okay, but even if we didn't, I will tell you there were none that were more important. And so, as Dave is putting this together, he creates a manuscript. And this manuscript is going on, at that time, some 800 pages or so. So, he's going along, he's getting support from Charles and others to make this happen. And then sometimes bad things happen. Hang on a second, where did that go? Good question. Yep, there we go. Sorry about that. Sometimes, if I put my glasses on, that probably wouldn't happen. Anyways, Dave had a light stroke about 2012. And with the light stroke, he backed off of what he was doing, and it pretty well sat idle for a number of years. However, he had shared his scholarship with a bunch of other people. As a matter of fact, as I was working on my master's thesis, he shared some of the letters that he had already done with me. He shared letters with other folks, so it wasn't like he didn't want to, he just wanted to hold this stuff together and keep it to himself. And then in the spring of 2022, Charles Baxley convinced Dave, hey, let the 250th Revolution, or Commission of the American Revolution here in South Carolina, get the rights to edit and publish the Marion papers. And Dave agreed. So myself and a guy named Ben Rubin, who was actually up in New Jersey, we took on the Marion papers, and we were going to get it ready to be published. Okay, so as we started this, the whole idea was that we were going to go in and take what Dave had and be able to make it so that it was robust, to include maps, illustrations, artwork, biographies of those that were there, so that you as individuals and scholars and other folks would be able to take the Marion papers and understand them in a depth that no one has yet had before. Won't go through that again. Okay, so covers from 1759 to 1795 at Marion's death. Over 700 letters, and something Dave also did was he did another extended piece that was on conflicts in command. If you've studied Marion, you know that somewhere around late 1781 going into 1782, Hezekiah Mayhem, who was one of his lieutenants, and Peter Oree, they were given state commands to raise cavalry regiments, at which point they got big for their britches and decided that since Marion only commanded militia, that they didn't have to listen to Marion anymore. Of course, it didn't help that Nathaniel Greene made their dates of commission the same day. Okay, so that created problems too. But anyway, that's something that we'll either put out, we may put that out separately. Okay. It is included that we will not just do the Patriot side. This is an inclusive story. People don't understand the Civil War that took place here in South Carolina in the American Revolution. When you look at all the different players and actors in the American Revolution in South Carolina, we like to think it's the Patriots versus the British. I'll give you a good example. How many of you heard of the Waxhaws Massacre? Okay, Waxhaws Massacre, Bannister Tarleton, Bloody Band, if you've ever seen The Patriot, okay, Patriot's got about, 279 things wrong with it historically. But Bannister Tarleton, who was Tavington in the Patriot, he goes and he attacks 350 Virginia Continentals over near Waxhaws, and out of 350, 113 are killed outright. You had 150 wounded, most of them so badly that they couldn't be transported, and 53 taken prisoners out of 350 men. They did not take prisoners except at the very end. And most of these wounds and deaths were caused by saber and bayonet. Okay? And you hear that and you say, those dang British. Ladies and gentlemen, those dang British were from New York, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania. They were provincial troops, American loyalists. It was a civil war that we were fighting here. Okay, so Marion portraits. Nobody really knows what Marion looks like. Okay, so the descriptions is that he was below medium height, swarthy, black eyes, hook nose, high forehead, jutting chin. Okay, in my mind's eye, when I put all those things together, I think of a short Jamie Farr from MASH. That's kind of what I get. And you see Francis Marion's signature there. Francis Marion's signature shows up on the majority of his documents just like that. So he had that flourish that he had to it. But one of the main things that we tried to do with the Marion papers here is put things into context and do analysis. So Ben and I are both military guys. However, there was a lot more going on than just the military aspects here in South Carolina. So one of the things you have to do is, okay, what was going on in the rest of the American Revolution while all of this was taking place? Because there are times when Francis Marion was the only opposition really to the British in South Carolina. When Greene went up into North Carolina, Sumter had been wounded at Blackstock Plantation, and Marion was the only guy. Hey, Rawdon and Watson, two British commanders, came after Marion hard. Sumter came out in the field and they kind of switched off, went after Sumter for a little bit, but then they came after Marion again in the Bridges campaign. So they were trying to eliminate Marion because they saw him as a pain in their side. But I will tell you something about Francis Marion. Francis Marion had a very difficult time, much more difficult than Sumter in my opinion. If you look at where he was and where his operations were taking place, Sumter, his base of operations was up closer to Rock Hill. You did not have a lot of hotbeds of loyalists up in that general area. Then you move over across the Wateree River and go north of the Santee. You've got a heavy loyalist population there, particularly up as you go up around Horry County and Marion County now, up in that area. You had strong loyalist population. You had the British were coming from Georgetown. The British were coming from Charleston. The British were coming from Camden. The British had a support base at Fort Sumter. Let's try it again, at Fort Watson. Okay, so Marion's men were in a hotbed area in which every time they answered the call to go to Marion, they did not know what they would find when they went home. One of the things that the Patriot captured very well is when they saw the smoke on the horizon and went and the guy found that his wife and son were killed. Happened on a daily basis here in South Carolina. So if you picked up your musket and rode with Marion, you gave up being able to defend your family during that time. So yes, there are a lot of stories like that that we get from the Marion papers that you understand that Francis Marion's biggest task that he had was leadership. Because think about this, he could not provide anything to these guys, and I'll talk to you about that just a little bit. The intent with the Marion papers is that they will be born digitally. What does that mean to you? You're going to be able to go to a website, click on it, and read it at no cost to yourself. We're going to make some hard copies for people that need the hard copy thing, but generally you're going to be able to just do this. The papers of Nathaniel Green are the model that we're going to use. As a matter of fact, they are allowing us to use a lot of the verbiage they had, but we have gone in. The papers of Nathaniel Green were done a little while ago. We're able to take it and from our military experience and background, be able to give more analysis on what was going on with Marion, with the others that were involved with the operations that Marion had, and to make assessments of what really took place. We're doing this, a guy named Patrick O'Kelly has published Marion's orderly book. When you use the letters in conjunction with the orderly book, you're able to tell the story. Where was he? What was going on? Okay, so we have gone through, read it through, figured out what needed to be fixed, added more to it, and we revised things as we needed to revise them. We turned this stuff into Charles this past August, and he immediately said, not detailed enough. Okay, if you know anything about Charles, hey, that's Charles. As soon as you give him something, he pulls out his red pen and gets to work. I've told him that he would edit the menu if it didn't take too long for the food to get there. Okay. Anyways, I love Charles dearly, and he's going to be greatly missed. We're going to have biographies, maps, artwork, all that. So all that is a work in progress. We think that all the word portion of it should be done by the end of June. And then we can, but we're working on the maps, how we want the maps to look and all that. Some cartographers you work with don't want to use contour lines and that sort of thing. And others, hey, they don't care. Some say don't use color. Others say they do. So we're working through all that. Okay, but anyways, we're in the final editing so that we can get the word portion at least out for peer review. Okay, things that we found out. See that picture of Francis Marion? A guy named Dale Watson, who lives over in Charleston, did that for us. And that's after we coached him through and talked about the Francis Marion that we had discovered in the Francis Marion papers. He was a French Huguenot descent. He was about 48 years old when all this started. Dark complexion. Got that hook nose, jutting chin, that high forehead, that's probably covered a little bit by his helmet there. And wanted to use a model a little bit of who this might have been. Ladies and gentlemen, I found a guy who was a French Huguenot descent. He was actually from Louisiana. He was about 50 years old. He had all the features that Francis Marion supposedly had. And this is not an exact rendition of him, but kind of emulates him a little bit. And if you'll excuse my language, this guy was also a military man and a hard ass, which Marion was. And this is a little bit of a vision that resembles a guy named General Claire Chennault. You know who General Claire Chennault is? He was the commander of the Flying Tigers in World War II. And he had all those attributes. So this may not be exactly what Marion looks like, but I will tell you, as I said, Light Horse Harry Lee was not too complimentary on how Marion looked. But artists are very reticent to make somebody look ugly. They just don't. As a matter of fact, Dale also did Colonel Francis Lord Rawdon, the British commander that was at Camden. and commanded what is now historic Camden, that area there. And he was known historically as the ugliest man in the British Army, and we still can't get an artist to capture that. So there we go. Okay, so.
I once heard that Marion spoke, someone told me one time that Marion spoke with a slight French accent. Have you been able to document that?
Negative. Have not seen anything that says what accent he may have had. Okay, so things we've discovered. Francis Marion was the go-to guy. Okay, he commanded the light infantry during the Cherokee War under Moultrie. Okay, you wanted a guy that was aggressive. You wanted a guy that was assertive and had initiative, and that was the guy you put in charge of your light infantry. That was Marion. Fort Dorchester. Early on, when we had separated here, you had Marion go to Fort Dorchester. Why? It was basically an independent command. He commanded not only his troops, which at the time were kind of state troops, but he also commanded militia that came in. If you read that period of his life, hey, he was in charge, without a doubt, but was glad to go back. Fort Sullivan. Somewhere around the February time frame, 2nd South Carolina, Marion was a major, actually was a captain, got promoted to major, and he goes over to Fort Sullivan, and he is in large part responsible for a lot of the construction of that palmetto log fort. His men and others were the ones who were doing it. Marion commanded it, helped them get there, and if you read about this, Moultrie was not exactly a hard charging kind of guy. Okay, hey, he was hey, take it easy, we'll get to it, and I'm sure that must have been frustrating for Marion. When you get up to the 28th of June, 1776, and the British attacked that palmetto log fort, Francis Marion commanded the left wing. Francis Marion's men on those guns were actually engaging the flagship with Commodore Sir Peter Parker. Now this Peter Parker, no relation to Spider-Man that we've been able to tell. Okay, so Marion's men had telling effect on those ships. The other side had telling effect on these ships. That's because they didn't have a lot of gunpowder, and they had to take their time firing. So much so that the British at times thought that they were not, that they didn't have any ammunition left. Well, at one point, Governor Rutledge did send 500 pounds of powder. And I was 23 years as a field artilleryman, and I know if you cool the pieces, they're more accurate. Okay, and his comment was, cool and do mischief. Well, Francis Marion and his men did cool and did great mischief. Okay, Savannah, Marion's men attacked Spring Hill Redoubt and suffered significant casualties. When they came back from Savannah, they went over around Sheldon, over in the Beaufort area, and Marion was given command there. As a matter of fact, they consolidated regiments, and Marion was in command of several regiments that had been consolidated. And then you get to Charleston, and when you get to Charleston, something happened. Marion was not at the surrender of Charleston. According to legend, and that's kind of how we have to put it, I think it probably happened. Marion was invited to a party over on Tradd Street. And when he got to that party, the idea was you go in, you lock the door, there's plenty of booze, there are women available there as well. We don't know exactly what that meant, but anyways, you know, there were ladies present. And Marion did not like it and wanted to leave. If you've been over to Tradd Street, I believe it's 106 Tradd if I'm not mistaken, supposedly he jumped either from a window or a balcony. Hey, I'm a paratrooper and I wouldn't want to jump from either over at that location. And I'm here to tell you, he either dislocated or broke his ankle, okay? He was now not capable of performing his mission, and General Lincoln sent him and other folks that couldn't do their job out of the town. That's why Marion was not at the fall of Charleston. that mishap was probably the luckiest broken ankle in history. Because Marion went out, he evaded the troops that were looking for him because the British wanted anybody that was particularly a Continental troop. Oh, by the way, after the fall of Fort Sullivan, Marion was promoted to Lieutenant Colonel, and then he was Lieutenant Colonel Commandant. Lieutenant Colonel Commandant would have been the same as a full colonel, but the reason they call him Lieutenant Colonel Commandant is because British regiments did not have full colonels commanding them, and if you're going to have exchange of troops, you could go Lieutenant Colonel to Lieutenant Colonel. But anyways, but that impacted things down the line. Marion gets about 20 of his men. They said that they were young, they were old, they were black, they were white. The only thing great about them, according to Otho Holland Williams, was that they were mounted. Other than that, hey, they looked like a bunch of scrubs. And he talked about people laughing about him. Okay, you will read that General Gates did not like Marion, and he sent him away. That's what Otho Holland Williams said. That is not true. When Marion arrived there, he and Peter Ory were with Baron Johann de Kapp, who commanded the army. Otho Holland Williams says that he sent Marion away, and it wasn't Gates who sent him away, it was de Kapp, but there is a letter, and I believe that letter is dated the 10th of July, 1780. He sent Marion away to do reconnaissance and to do some other type activities like foraging. And he wrote to General Caswell introducing Marion to him and told him the mission he was on. So that's why Marion was sent away. But something more important that happened. All these guys were mounted with Marion. They had dinner with Baron de Kapp, and Baron de Kapp talked to him about to them about their experience in Europe. And de Kapp described the use of partisans, mounted partisans, working behind enemy lines, and what a great impact it made on the enemy operations. Ladies and gentlemen, I am a firm believer that conversation with Baron de Kapp led Francis Marion to becoming the Swamp Fox. I think that was the foundation for his outlook on what he could do. He went to Camden with Gates. The day before the Battle of Camden, General Gates told Marion he wanted to go and destroy the boats on the Santee River so that Cornwallis would not have the boats to be able to escape. And what he also did is he told Marion to take command of the local militia. Marion left that day, the 15th of August, 1780. The next day was the tremendous defeat at Camden, where Gates was beaten by Cornwallis at the Battle of Camden. However, Marion was not there. Marion arrived somewhere around the 17th of August in what is now modern-day Johnsonville, South Carolina. I grew up 7 miles from Johnsonville. And at that location, Marion took command. And when I talk to you about taking command and his transition to a partisan, this is my impression of Francis Marion when he arrived at Witherspoon's Ferry. You got this little guy, and he's wearing a short red round waistcoat. He's got his helmet on like he's got there. He's still walking with a limp. And these folks get together, the local militia, to see this guy that has now come in with an order from a continental commander that they don't have to follow because they're not in their chain of command. And Marion steps up and says, "Men, I cannot give you anything. I can't give you food. I can't give you horses. I can't give you ammunition. The only thing that I can do is I can lead you to defeat those who are trying to deprive you of your liberty and your homes. But if you follow me, you will follow my orders, and you will follow the orders of the officers I appoint over you who are already in place, because I'm not changing them. There will be no questions of authority. And our next mission is to destroy the boats on Santee River. Officers, to me, we move out in 2 hours. And it went something like that. Okay. Who follows a little short, ugly guy that can give you nothing? They followed somebody that gave them a chance. And the next action, they destroyed the boats on the Santee River. They released prisoners at Great Savannah. At Blue Savannah, hey, talk about audacity. With 53 men, Marion attacked Major Micaiah Gainey and Captain Jesse Barfield, who had 250 Tories, and he attacked them with 53. He knew how many they had, and he still attacked them and drove them into the swamp. And if you've been over where Blue Savannah is, it drops off 16 feet into that swamp where they attacked over there. And he talks in his report that he drove them into a swamp that was fit only for Tories. And that is what you call success. He had 53 men. He got back to Ports Ferry over near Johnsonville, and his next action, he talks about to go over towards King Street. He had over 100 men. He never had more than between 100 and 200 usually. Bridges' campaign had about 400, which was unusual. But this guy, and what we discovered in the Marion papers, is absolutely fantastic. We think, and Steve Smith, the state archaeologist here with South Carolina Archaeological Institution over at Carolina, Steve and I have talked a bit about this, and his books are great, talks about Snow's Island. Everybody talks about Marion and Snow's Island. We think that Snow's Island was a geographical area, because if you look at where he was, and you look at his orderly book and the camps that he would have had, you had camps at Ports Ferry on both sides of the river. You had camps at Dunham's Bluff. You had camps on Snow's Island at Goddard's Plantation. You had camps at Britain's Neck. You had camps at Potato Ferry and that sort of thing. So, all things being equal, pretty good. Geographical area, and they got the support of the people in that area. Marion versus Sumter. You will read most of the authors, and they will tell you that during the Rounds campaign, Sumter attacked Fort Granby over here in West Columbia, was driven off from that, goes to Belleville, which is over at the confluence of the Wateree and the Congaree River, got driven off from that, went to Fort Watson, tried to attack Fort Watson without a reconnaissance, got driven off from that, and then he goes to a place over near Bishopville called Radcliffe's Bridge and fights a running retreat until he's able to burn the bridge on Lynch's Creek and get away. During that time, the day, the 20th of February, the day that Sumter started his siege over here at Fort Granby, he sent a letter to Marion, basically saying, time is of the essence. So the day he starts his siege, he sends a letter to Marion saying time is of the essence, that had to cross 2 rivers, go through bad guy territory, and find a guy as elusive as the swamp fox. It took 6 days to get there. At this point, all the biographers say Marion did nothing. Marion did not respond. Marion did not want to be under Sumter's command, so he dispersed his troops so they would not have to serve under Sumter. He claimed that the British forces were too great in number, and it had never bothered him before, so that was just an excuse he used so he wouldn't have to serve under Sumter. all of that is wrong. The Marion papers clearly show that the day that Sumter received the letter, he actually received 2 letters the same day. He said, hey, I've just received his second letter. We don't know, and he did 2 responses. The first one we can't find, that's not extant, but the second one is, and he says, I will gather my troops as quickly as I possibly can, and I will be at the headwaters of Black River on the 29th of February. It wasn't leap year, he meant the 1st of March. And when you follow his orderly book, he's exactly where he said he would be when he said he would be there. His letter catches Sumter right after his attack on Fort Watson. After he gets that letter, he writes to Marion again. And Marion was, if you're on Highway 378 going towards Columbia, and you cross from Turbeville, you cross I-95, and you get to the next crossroads. The next crossroads is Highway 527. If you take a right and go down there about 3 or 4 miles, you'll find Salem Black River Church. That is where Marion was and where he told Sumter he would be. Sumter writes Marion a letter, he gets it there, and Sumter says, hey, my horses are too tired, you're gonna have to come to me. Takes a little bit over a day for that letter to get to Marion. Marion gets the letter. What do you think he did? He marched to Sumter. In the meantime, Rawdon is actually out in force, threatens Sumter, so Sumter makes up his mind he's going to go to Marion. And ladies and gentlemen, they passed each other. But at the conclusion of the Rounds campaign, Sumter wrote to General Greene and said, Marion was of no help. It couldn't have been that out of 283 men that Sumter had with him, that he took somewhere around 40% casualties. Okay, but that could have been he was looking for an excuse. I don't know. And I shouldn't say anything disparaging about General Sumter. Okay, but Marion was devoted to duty. He was devoted to his mission. Light Horse Harry Lee and others say that Marion could be moody and all that stuff. I don't doubt that, and I think all of us got that in us a little bit. But I find absolutely nothing in the Marion letters that show that that impacted what he did as an officer. So there is that. Okay, so Battleground Preservation Trust and the South Carolina 250th, we have worked on the Marion papers, but we're also working on a bunch of other things. We're working on Liberty Trail. The Liberty Trail is over 80 battlefields around South Carolina with the Revolutionary War. We're decisively engaged right now at Waxhaws, Camden, Hobkirk Hill, Hanging Rock, Fort Watson, Utah Springs, Fort Farallon. If you want to see a fully extant readout from the Revolutionary War, that's where it is. And there we go. The QR code, hey folks, I've had folks say that they're terrified of QR codes. Hey, all you gotta do is hold your camera up there and it'll give you a link. Hit the link and it'll take you to our website where this stuff is. Or you can go to scbattlegroundtrust.org and that'll do it as well. And if you will, please put your email back there. We'll shoot you an email. We'll try to get you one way or the other. But it is your donations and your becoming members of the South Carolina Battleground Preservation Trust that help us do what we do. So your help is unbelievably important. That's all I got to say about that. What are your questions? Yes.
I've always been intrigued by how well Andrew Pickens and Francis Marion got along at the Battle of Utah Springs. I've never read or heard anything about, or even if they ever met. Do you have any information or thoughts on that?
I have not seen anything that really talked about their interaction. I mean, that's, Pickens was wounded. Marion commanded militia line, which was the first line. Green kind of took what Daniel Morgan did at Cowpens, and he used the same type concept at Utah. Try it again, Guilford Courthouse, and then he tried the same thing at Utah Springs. So you had Marion commanding the front line. Now remember, okay, so you get over here and you're in the defense in Cowpens, and you're in the defense at Guilford Courthouse. You're making an offensive operation at Utah Springs. Comparatively, Cowpens, give me 2 shots. Okay, Marion's 2nd South Carolina, or actually, it's not his 2nd South Carolina, it's Marion's brigade, his militia, at Utah Springs averaged 17 shots apiece. As a matter of fact, the reason that he pulled back is they had run out of ammunition. Other questions? Okay. Thank you all. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just want to point out, talk about Peter Horry. You know, we have his sword on display. I don't know if you've seen that before. It's right post-Revolutionary War, but still 18th century, as it was militia. But what happened to his manuscript? You know? I mean, he gave it upon Weems.
He sent the manuscript to Weems. You know, he actually took Weems' book and made notes in it, and he didn't make a whole bunch of notes. And actually, that book with his notes in it are over at the South Carolina Library. You know, supposedly there was a copy here in Columbia, and the name of the guy that had it eludes me right now. But supposedly his house was burned, and I think that's what happened to it.
Yeah, William Gilmore Simms supposedly had the only
Yep,
copy.
that's
it.
it.
Was,
Right.
It was either burned as plantation in Bamberg or in Columbia, one of the two. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. William
Because
Gilmore
he did
Simms.
cite it in his biography of Marion.
Right.
Okay, anybody else? Thank you so much.
I wanted to mention to y'all, now that you're in the mood, to come out tomorrow for Revolutionary War Day here at the museum. It goes from 10 to 4, and it's free. And we got a list of activities over there that you can take with you, both that and the handout. So, there you go. Hope to see you.